Welcome to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and we're thrilled to have you joining us this week. Each time we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges throughout the global data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem, regardless of whether your company is a data center operator, such as a co-location, hyperscale, edge, modular, or wholesale data center related provider, or perhaps your company does something in and around data center technology or data center facilities in and around the data center ecosystem, or maybe your company builds, constructs, perhaps you're in some facet of data center construction or real estate or investment, or maybe your team, maybe your company, maybe your organization is all about providing some kind of outsourced sales and marketing within the global data center industry. But regardless of what your company does, if you are on the go-to-market team, perhaps in sales, like as an account executive or business development or sales development rep, or maybe you're in post-sales, like in client success or account management or solutions engineering or something similar to that, or some facet of marketing, such as field or event marketing, content, social media, product marketing, digital marketing, thought leadership, or all of the above into some kind of Swiss Army knife role. Or perhaps you're responsible for road mapping and product and innovation, or maybe your company has both a direct and an indirect playbook, and you're working on the indirect part in channel partnerships, working with like VARs, value-added resellers, managed service providers, integrators, master agents, or something like that. Or perhaps you are the executive sponsor, the leader, whose job it is to go out into the marketplace and recruit the best and brightest to give your team the best possible chance of crushing it as individuals, as teams, as a company in this amazing period of growth in and around the data center industry. If this is the first time that you're joining us for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let us know in the comments what you do in the data center industry. We would absolutely love to know. And if you've been with us before or you're a frequent flyer, welcome back. We are thrilled to have you with us as well. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. You can do so for free directly on the DCSMI website. So you get notified directly to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe at dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda for this week? What are the big questions, the big challenges that we're going to be talking about? First, we'll look at how to find new deals with large data center clients. Then we'll talk all about how to reach targeted data center decision makers with better message penetration. After that, we'll turn our attention to how to transition into a data center business development role. Right after that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's show, we'll look at how to create a full funnel data center events program for lead generation, how to improve data center sales productivity by leveraging automation, and how to segment your data center leads based on life cycle stages and behaviors. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that's top of mind for you, your team members, your coworkers across your organization that you think is a hot enough, important enough issue that we should address on an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first topic, this week's first question, which is, how do we find deals with large data center clients? That is a fantastic question, and it gets at the heart of what large is for you and the specifics around large, and how do you make sure that you're able to get your coworkers, your other team members, and other people throughout your organization to be on the same page with how you define large data center deals and what large data center clients and what it means to find the deals. So just to make sure we're covering the basics, we want to start with a super crisp definition of your ideal client profile. Where are these large data center clients located? Can they be located anywhere on the planet? Or are they just located in one particular region of the world, such as the Americas or EMEA or Asia Pacific or something like that? Or maybe even that's way too broad. And maybe all of these data center clients need to be located within one particular continent or one particular country, or maybe even a region within a country. The geographic part of defining where these large data center clients need to be located for finding these deals is super, super important. And a lot of it has to do with the nature of your business model. Like, for example, where do you have capabilities to be able to market and sell and service effectively? And there's certain kind of business models that need a physical presence way more than others. Like, for example, cybersecurity and virtualization, two big areas within the data center technology stack, are a lot more conducive to being able to manage remotely and use a lot of automation when they're up and running. Data center cooling, data center power require a lot more physical presence. And yes, there's definitely some areas of those that you can keep tabs on remotely once they're up and running with some good IoT and some good BMS kind of practices with all that. But for sure, you're going to need physical presence both initially and on some kind of routine basis for maintenance, not quite as conducive to being able to run remotely. So what all of that means is, depending on the nature of your business model, real estate would be another great example. Construction and real estate, sure, you can do some basic account management and planning long distance, but for the most part, you're likely not doing much with site selection or construction or the real estate facet of that without going on site for significant periods of time that have to do with the nature of that relationship and business model. So what you do within the data center ecosystem plays a large role in how narrow or how expansive the geographic part of your ideal client profile is going to be. Second, company size. How big or small are these ideal clients? When we say large data center clients, that pretty much infers that we're going to knock out small and medium-sized clients. But what really is large? Is large 10 megawatts, 100 megawatts, a gigawatt? On the power side, is it a certain amount of square feet? Is it a certain amount of square meters? Is it a certain employee headcount? And for most go-to-market professionals, most marketers, most sales folks, you're typically running on marketing technology and sales technology and prospecting database that normalize around the number of employees, the number of full-time employees or headcount that a particular company has. So in the case of large data center clients, what is a large data center client? Is it a company that has at least 500 employees, or is that more like mid-market? Or is it 1,000 employees? Is that still mid-market? Is it 5,000 employees, or is just below that still kind of mid-market? Only you can define that. For a lot of companies, pretty unanimously, if you look at LinkedIn's definition with its brackets of like 10,000 plus, and that's the same database that regular LinkedIn and Sales Navigator and LinkedIn Campaign Manager, its ads platform, won't use that. LinkedIn is kind of the gold standard in our industry for the world's most trusted B2B professional networking platform. Pretty safe to say that LinkedIn sees a large client as 10,000 plus. Is that where your company draws the line? Or is a large client 1,000 plus or 5,000 plus? Again, I can't tell you exactly what the answer should be for your company or your team, but I can tell you without a doubt that before you go too far down the path of worrying about finding the right deals and nurturing the right deals and lead generation and targeting and brand awareness, get really, really clear on geographically where they're located and what large actually means. The third place to think about in your ideal client profile is, depending on the nature of your business model, industry can be extraordinarily relevant. Why in certain business models is industry extraordinarily relevant? Because in a significant amount of pockets within the data center ecosystem, especially among operators like colocation providers, hyperscale providers, edge providers, and various kinds of segments within technology, especially when it comes to the geographic location at the intersection of certain industries or business models or verticals, there are certain credentials, certain compliance requirements, certain certifications that kick in, especially if you work with highly regulated industries. So if your company wants to be doing business with healthcare, health tech, financial services, fintech, manufacturing, government, schools. There's very likely in your geographic region credentialing that needs to happen, investments that need to happen. If you have that, great. That's in your ideal client profile for finding deals in these large data center clients as a specific inclusion to focus on. If you know there are regulated industries where you're not going to be able to meet those requirements, and because of that, you're going to get disqualified really quickly, you want to list those in your ideal client profile as well as exclusions, because when it comes to cold outbound, when it comes to ads, prospecting, lead qualification, segmentation, those inclusions and those exclusions matter a lot for efficiency, getting on the same page, alignment, and getting the best deals, finding the best deals for these large data center clients. So get on that same page with what you're geographically targeting, what's the minimum size to be considered large, and are there certain industries that are a fantastic fit and certain industries that are just not a fit at all right now based on where your company is at with your current capabilities. That's going to allow you to build out your target account list. Depending on the size of your company, you may have various rules to use to decide how you divvy out the assigned or named accounts that individual sales teams or individuals within the sales teams will work on. That's at the account level, the company level. And then we need to think about the stakeholders that are within these accounts. Typically, the most important stakeholders on the decision committees will designate as like a primary or secondary buyer persona, the most or second most important economic stakeholder. We really need to understand what's going on in their world. What's the leading indicator that they're going to be in market for your product or service in the coming weeks, in the coming months, and eventually a percentage of those will be set up to generate a deal. They're not going to generate the deal. They generate some kind of behavior and some kind of interaction with your company that causes you to open a deal on their behalf. Remember, no prospect is ever going to come to you and say, hey, it's your lucky day. I'm here to generate a deal for you. No, they're coming to you because they need help with storage. They need help with cybersecurity. They're trying to decommission a legacy facility. They need help with cooling. They need help with sustainability, efficiency, whatever it is. But rest assured, very few would ever come to you and say, oh, I'm sorry, we're a small business, so we're disqualified. We're probably too small. Nobody calls themselves small businesses unless they work for a government entity or a huge bank that doesn't understand how fragmented or segmented small businesses are. And rest assured, nobody comes to you and says, hey, it's your lucky day. I'm going to give you a deal. If they are, they're probably pitching something to you as opposed to buying something from you. But for you to be able to find the deals, you need to know what's going to happen in the coming weeks or the coming months. That's a leading indicator that they're going to be looking for your product or service. And the way we figure that out is by doing customer insight research, buyer persona research, and really digging into what are those 5 or 10 front burner topics that they're focused on right now. And a simple framework is like getting clarity on the 5 or 6 big goals that the individual is working on individually, as a team, as a company. The individual goals almost certainly show up in places like job descriptions, how they self-describe themselves on their LinkedIn profile. They'll for sure will show up in objectives and key results, OKRs, if their company runs on that kind of framework. But generally, people don't share those with you publicly. The only way you're going to get access to those is having a good trusted advisor relationship where they're willing to tell you what's really going on in the company as to what you're inferring from being a outsider. So that will help us figure out the goals. And then we need to know what they're struggling with most in your category. What are their biggest challenges? What's frustrating them? What's driving them nuts? What's messing with their work-life balance, their sanity, causing them to question their life choices and whether they should stay in this current job. And the key thing with these professional goals and challenges, we need to know these in their own words. Not what we think the words are, but what the words actually are. So we got to do our homework. Face-to-face, video calls, phone calls, surveys, studying their search footprint, studying how they describe themselves on their LinkedIn profiles, what kind of content and posts they share, how they interact with those. Sometimes we get really lucky and we can watch a podcast or a YouTube video of an interview they've done or a talk that they gave at a conference. So we can not only get the words, but we can get the inflection of the body language and read between the lines. All of that gives us great understanding as to how to be more client-centric, how to figure out how to walk a mile or kilometer in their shoes and really understand what's going on in the routine. The consensus on those 5 or 6 big goals, those 5 or 6 big challenges, helps you put together a top 10, a top 12 list, which happens to align really well with doing one event a month for the next 10 or 12 months. These could be webinars if it's not easy for all of your prospects and clients to attend in person. If you have the luxury of most of your prospects and clients be located nearby, I'm always a big fan of small, very targeted in-person events. You don't need large numbers to make an enormous dent if they're the right people from the right companies. You have a conference room that seats, say, 15 or 20 people, and most or all of the 15 or 20 people that are attending are from your target accounts. Typically, you'll likely get a couple clusters of 2 or more people from the same target accounts. Beautiful things will happen with educating and building trust with those larger data center clients if you're truly client-centric in your customer education and your thought leadership and sharing best practices to help each and every one of the people that are attending to get better at doing their jobs, to understand how others in similar kinds of job roles and similar kinds of companies, company sizes, industry targeting, company region, are addressing that very issue that is top of mind, that came up as a top 10 goal or challenge when you did the research on that particular segment. So in terms of finding the deals, we need to understand just how much the journey today has changed compared to as recently as 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was pretty common that your prospects and clients for data center related products and services would get about halfway through the research and decision-making process. They would do their searches on Google. They would ask some questions among peers on LinkedIn. They'd watch some YouTube videos. They'd attend some webinars. They'd get like to the 57% point as defined by CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner. And they'd say like, oh, okay, I got at least halfway there. Now I'm ready to schedule a tour, book a consultation, schedule a needs assessment, whatever it is. Essentially like a nice wrapper that provides higher perceived value around talk to sales. But that's now very much a point of nostalgia. No one spends half of the journey anymore with sales teams. People are more sales allergic than they've ever been, especially when we're talking about highly educated, highly technical, very skeptical, very cynical technologists and engineers and other kinds of big time relevant stakeholders in the data center ecosystem. That 57% number has jumped to 83, and it continues to accelerate, meaning 83% of a typical buyer's journey is now over before vendor contact or sales contact. That research comes from Gartner, and it's really, really important to understand and prepare for that, because what that means is your prospects and clients are likely a lot more sales allergic. Then you realize in order for us to get back into being considered and in these conversations early enough to be able to influence the criteria that they use to make decisions on these deals as larger clients, it's critical that we figure out a way to get in early and often. Early is so important because by default, they're going to ignore us the first 83% of their research and decision-making process. So if we're complacent and we keep doing things the way we've always done, best case scenario, we might be in there for the final 17% of the game, but that's not sufficient, because if you're sitting out the first 83% of the game, you're going to get trounced by one or more competitors who were smart, savvy, persistent enough to figure out a way to earn their way in early and often. How can you earn your way in early and often? A lot of it is navigating out of that vendor box, getting out of the vendor box and staying out of the vendor box, so you're not seen as a commoditized provider. And in the most effective way to do this in nearly all situations is to reposition yourself to be seen as more like a teacher or a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, maybe even a thought leader. From a practical standpoint, what we're essentially looking to do is to get away from the vendor-focused conversations and invite the right people from the right accounts to attend and participate in great immersive educational experiences. Webinars, lunch and learns, breakfast seminars, after hours versions of training workshops. Essentially what we need to get all really, really good at is educating and building trust. So what we're looking to do is basically stand up a program that's so valuable and so hyper relevant to who they are and what's top of mind for each of these segments that they see your series And this isn't a one and done. It is a series. It's a monthly event. So we stay in there early and often. We want to be in on as many of those 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision. And a really good place to start is to have 12 events a year covering 28 of those surface area touch points. And the way that we earn our way in early and often is we need to be perceived as an integral part of your core buyer persona's learning and development, part of their professional development. So they're coming to you and your client-facing team members and whoever else you wrap into and invite into this great world-class educational program to learn best practices from you and your colleagues in such a way that it is so valuable, so remarkable, so hyper relevant that they can't help but want to bring their coworkers and their boss with them. So you get to meet and be able to educate and build trust with multiple members of that decision committee in the formative stages, where you have an opportunity to really shape the criteria quite dramatically about how they view your niche, how they view your segment, how they view your topical areas of expertise within the broader data center ecosystem. So to find these deals with larger data center clients, get super specific at the company level who they are, define the finite list of accounts you want to target, who the people are that are most relevant in these accounts and what they care most about, and then plan an incredibly valuable, immersive, highly relevant series of educational events that you run month after month for multiple stakeholders from these same companies. Over time, the goal is to get so many people coming from some of these target accounts that like they look around and like there's 20 seats in the room and 5 people from the same company. One of them comes over to you and says, wow, we're really stacking the decks from our company. Well, you know what? This is so amazing. We're doing an offsite next month. Why don't you just come in and present to the whole company or present it to our entire engineering organization or IT organization? Because you've already won the 5 of us over. So this is when you really, really start to get the inside track on what's going on with this particular account. You've escaped the vendor box. You've guaranteed that you stay on the short list. You're starting to proactively knock competitive options off of that short list. And you're training them to know that when it comes to your category, that you have some of the smartest, helpful, most approachable people on the planet for helping this company address some of their biggest, thorniest goals and challenges that directly and indirectly relate to your category. So how will you find the deals? Because you're winning these folks over. You're winning over the perfect people. You're shaping their belief system. They're going around quoting your best practices and methodologies in internal meetings. They're using your PDFs, your tools, your worksheets to help organize this bigger picture initiative. And they for sure will be coming to you when it comes to talking about that bigger deal when it's a natural point. You can try to certainly accelerate it. What a lot of people will do from a practical standpoint is, let's say it's an in-person event, half hour when they first arrive for some little bit light networking and some breakfast or lunch. They'll have a 45 minute formal part of the workshop, class, session, whatever you want to call it. My advice on all of it is your slides, what you're talking about should be so over the top valuable for who they are and what they care about that you're super confident that if this was one of 50 sessions at a national or global conference, you're incredibly confident this would be in the top 5, and that you'd have a long line of people standing online to talk with you after your session was over, and you'd have one of the 5 highest rated sessions at the entire event. You're highly confident in all of that. And then, obviously, because it's small group, you can make it very participatory. You give a chance for questions and answers at the end. And for anyone that wants to take the tour, see the demo, learn more about your product or service afterwards, of course, they're there. It's a fantastic time to make it a little bit more about yourself, but early on, over deliver on being seen as a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, and a thought leader. Provide massive amounts of value that make them be like, wow, I learn more today than I do most of the time when I fly across the country or fly across the world to attend a conference that takes me and my colleagues out of work for several days. And like, this was only just a couple of hours and it's the next town over, or they attended on a webinar or what have you. But that's the general impression that you're looking for. And that's how the deals will find you, because you're digging the well before you're thirsty. You're educating and building trust. And most of all, you're getting the most important people at the most important accounts that you're targeting to spend a significant amount of their discretionary time learning from your client-facing team members. Now, what happens when you exhaust your available internal subject matter experts? Well, they don't all have to be internal subject matter experts. They can be contractors, they can work for vendors, they can be consultants, they can be channel partners. Again, like in a perfect world, your account executives and business development reps and marketing folks can run these events just purely based on their own institutional knowledge and industry expertise. If they don't have it, well, they move into like concierge, moderator, host, like TV interview kind of panel discussion. That's another great thing too that a lot of people overlook, is depending on the nature of what you do, a super interesting event format that you could use from time to time is inviting 2 or 3 representative clients, 3 or 4 representative clients, 2, 3, 4 representative channel partners, whatever is relevant to this buyer persona. And you have 8 or 10, 12 prepared questions that you ask each of them. And some of them will agree, some of them will disagree. There'll be some counter discussion back and forth between the people that are on the panel. And if you target the right attendees versus the people that are on the panel, wonderful things will happen with being able to educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time in a way that makes those folks know that you are the go-to option when it comes to anything and everything having to do with their needs within the data center ecosystem. So that's what I'd be focusing on 100% for finding the right deals with larger data center clients, is get that ideal client profile really dialed in, get a really crisp target account list, do your homework, spend the time to build out your buyer personas, because that's going to have a massive impact on the relevance of your event calendar for the next 12 months. And then go recruit your internal and external subject matter experts that can give a great 30, 45-minute talk on each one of those 12 topics. Have a good registration landing page, some good bullet points on what they're going to learn, a nice like 1 or 2 minute video of what they can expect to learn, have them register and execute repeatedly over and over and over again. Again, we need to get in early and we need to be in there often. The early part is getting out of the vendor box, stop looking like a car salesperson or insurance salesperson. No disparagement meant for that. But we want to make sure that we're seen as a trusted advisor and an expert, not just someone that's pushing a SKU or trying to get a deal on the deal board. Because in the world we live in now with the self-driven buyer's journey, if you're just selling a transaction, if you're just reading the website to them, if you're just reading slides to them, not good. They don't need you. ChatGPT has won that battle. Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, they for sure have won that battle. If they didn't win the battle 10 years ago with YouTube videos and podcasts and Google search and LinkedIn, they have for sure won that battle now. So we have to do better than what your prospects and clients can get from the self-service tools. And the way we do better is hyper relevance, extreme value. So we're seen as part of the professional development and learning and development time that's put aside consistently by the right people in your target accounts. That's what I would 100% be focusing on when it comes to finding deals with large data center clients. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to help spread the word by hitting the like button. Okay, what is up next? What's our next topic for this week? How do we reach targeted data center decision makers with better message penetration? How do we reach targeted data center decision makers with better message penetration? That is a fantastic question. And it's an especially good question because I see so many people that lose before they start with this because they're sending very selfish, wishful thinking messages as opposed to sending very client-centric, prospect-centric messages. The reality is 5 years ago, a lot of outbound was very focused on diving immediately into how wonderful you are and how quickly you can get them to book time on your calendar with very selfish asks. So you take a complete stranger that's never heard of you and your company before. You're thinking that you're agitating something pouring some salt on the wound, and that your call to action is going to immediately get them to be like, oh, wow, this was so amazingly relevant that I'm going to book time on your calendar. And that might happen with low single digits if you're lucky, maybe not at all. But the reality is, okay, what next level looks like today, it isn't just that there's email deliverability issues. It isn't just that people's email boxes are more overloaded than ever. The LLMs, the generative AI, has now introduced that new version of that with way more messages. And it starts with the bootlicking and the brown nosing by giving them compliments that are hyper relevant to something that you scraped off of their LinkedIn profile. And they see that over and over and over again. So they know you're up to something. So again, the level of suspicion is still quite high, even if you think that the tools are allowing you to send 600 messages a day instead of 60 messages a day. And again, if you annoy enough people, you might eventually get very low single digits that are curious enough to kick your tires. But they certainly don't see you as a trusted advisor at this point. They're certainly, in that context, not looking to you as someone that's going to educate and build a trusted advisor relationship with them. So the question is, like, how do we reach them with better message penetration? The better message penetration largely comes down to understanding how much buyer habits have changed. What do I mean by changed? Well, it used to be that in the kind of Web 2.0, 10 years ago framework, it was very common to find that as mobile device adoption really started to take off, and social media really started to take off, and it became super easy to do voice searches using search engines on people's phones, and it's instant gratification. So it was quite common at the time that depending on your ideal clients, depending on your target buyer personas, you could count on the fact that by the time people get to you, that they've done a fair amount of homework. And in some cases, they might even be more up to speed on your category than some of your more recent hires, which actually was not a great scenario for your more recent hires. So it really forced you to level up on the onboarding and the ramp period with people that had newly joined your team, like as a sales development or account executive or account manager or someone like that. But now people have a ridiculous amount of expertise before they get to you, because all of those search queries, all those social media questions, all the YouTube videos, all the podcasts, all the webinars, that's all still there. But in the last couple of years, we've added a whole new level of immediate gratification. The generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, Grok. And what that allows people to do is to go way faster. They don't have to ask a query anymore and go through 10 blue links and try to figure out what's going on. No, they can get answers immediately. 7 by 24 by 365. And this is a lot of competition for attention with your core personas. So how, in this kind of environment, how do we reach them with better message penetration? Well, what's ending up happening is relevance is more important than ever. Client centricity is more important than ever. So when it comes to these targeted decision makers, we really, really have to know who they are and what's going on in their world. So make sure that you're really tight on the basics with your ideal client profile, like, you know, how big or small their company is, because that makes an enormous difference a lot of times on how their sophistication level with different tools and categories, whether one person is doing 5 jobs, whether it's 5 separate teams or 5 separate departments, the level of budget, the amount of integration, some kind of feature sets that are unique to enterprises that you typically wouldn't see in small and medium-sized businesses. And some of this overlaps with the things that your product manager would care about. However, they also play quite large in whether your messaging is going to land and resonate and truly penetrate and cut through the noise. So this is something, message penetration, using the right words, understanding exactly what to say at the right time. This is something that's hugely important for both marketing and sales professionals and full journey sales professionals, from the folks that are early on, like your SDRs, your BDRs, your account executives, and people that are even post-purchase, your account managers. Having a really good feel for who they are and what's top of mind for them is incredibly important. And if your business is aligned around repeat purchases or recurring revenue, like co-location or some kind of SaaS or some other kind of subscription, like, it's literally a new starting line every 30 days, right? So we really, really have to be dialed into what's going on in the world, how we relate, how we can meet them with where they are. So reaching them with better message penetration starts with that extreme clarity on, at the company level, their size, specific industries, where they're located, and then at the individual level, what are they working on right now that's relevant both directly and indirectly to your product or service category. What's like on their top 5 list? How are they? What's going to determine whether they get a good performance review, whether they're eligible for a bonus, or whether they're eligible for the opposite, whether they could be in big trouble if they drop the ball on those big goals. So understanding what's on their top 3 list, their top 5 list, super, super important. And we need to understand what's on their front burner in their own words, not what we think the words are, but what the words actually are. That's another big part of nailing message penetration and relevance, is getting their exact words as opposed to just guessing. And then we also need to know not just what they're working on, but what's driving them nuts, their biggest challenges. If you've ever filled out a premium content or webinar registration form or some other kind of lead generation conversion form on the DCSMI website, you know, we always ask, what's your biggest sales and marketing challenge? We ask that for a number of different reasons. One is the answer gets stored in each person's CRM record. So for individual outreach, or when we're having individual conversations with people, we know in their exact words what their biggest sales and marketing challenge is. Second, when it comes to targeted decision makers and understanding the full decision committee, when you start to get several people from the same company downloading your ebook, your report, subscribing to your newsletter, registering for your event or your webinar, and all of a sudden now you have 5, 10, 20 people from the exact same company that have written in, what's your biggest liquid cooling challenge? What's your biggest cybersecurity struggle? What's your biggest issue with, what's your biggest struggle with data center decommissioning, or whatever your particular product category is. So not only are you able to understand individually what each person cares about in their own words, but you can look and see, like, what's the consensus among multiple stakeholders from that same company, especially those that are on the decision committee. Are they largely saying the same thing, or are they all over the place? And whether they're aligned or whether they're the opposite of aligned, completely misaligned, that's super important for you to know. In a self-driven buyer's journey, a lot of being successful as an account executive is about helping to be a fantastic project manager that helps your internal champion proactively drive alignment across all of the most important stakeholders on your internal champion's team and other relevant stakeholders within that particular company. And the challenging part for you, and the opportunity at the same part, is there are certain kinds of categories of stakeholders in these companies who will weigh in on your initiative that you will never get to meet, because they flat out refuse to meet with salespeople. They flat out refuse to meet with vendors, but they definitely weigh in. And a lot of product categories and a lot of companies, these may be stakeholders in finance. These may be stakeholders in legal. These may be stakeholders in compliance. So to the extent that you are able to create thought leadership content that allows your internal champion to get buy-in in situations where you're never going to get face time with that particular person, it is incredibly important to get you out of the vendor box. There's all kinds of research that validates over and over and over again why thought leadership is the major unlock with this. LinkedIn does an annual research study with the PR giant Edelman every year. And in the most recent incarnation of that, they found that there's a 95% lift in outbound being effective when you're seen as a thought leader. There's like over a 50% lift in companies going to bat with you going to bat for you in an RFP, a request for proposal, request for quote kind of situation, when they see you as a thought leader. Overwhelming ability to reach hidden stakeholders, silent stakeholders that don't normally show up in any of these exploratory meetings. And it's all driven by being seen as a thought leader. Overwhelming evidence that thought leadership content is way more impactful, like 70% more impactful than traditional marketing and sales materials. So reaching the targeted data center decision makers is recognizing that the buyer's journey today is so different than it used to be. People very sales allergic, doing tons of research on their own. The risk aversion also makes it such that even if you get a warm introduction to the decision maker, If you haven't met with the decision makers, team members, with their direct reports and built consensus, there's a very, very, very high likelihood that the decision maker is sending you back to repeat the grades that you skipped, almost like school, right? Having to repeat. I think about the silly Adam Sandler movie, Billy Madison, where he wants to take over his father's chain of hotels. I don't know if it was inspired by Marriott or Hilton or something like that, but his father is a tycoon, a magnate that owns a very successful hospitality business, hotels. And Adam Sandler, Billy Madison, is this character that's skated by school by his father, basically bribing the teachers to pass him and give them acceptable grades. And now, as a grown-up who's in his 20s, 30s, the father and his advisors don't feel very confident turning the hotel business over to Billy. So he makes a deal with him that if he goes back and repeats every grade between kindergarten and 12th grade all the way through high school, that he can get the hotel. So in true silly, goofy Adam Sandler fashion, like, yeah, if you've never seen the movie, it's a cute movie. Go look it up on Netflix. But the whole idea is that if you manage to get to the decision maker and you haven't done the hard work of building consensus among the members of the decision committee, remember, there is no decision maker anymore. It's decision makers plural. And the decision makers plural are the members of the committee. This is why account-based marketing, account-based selling, account-based experience, whatever you want to call it, targeted accounts, getting multiple people from the same company learning with you putting yourself in a position where you can educate and build trust with multiple stakeholders from the same company, is so incredibly powerful for reaching the decision makers with better message penetration. So at the end of the day, it's all about providing value and being seen a lot more like professional development, learning and development, teachers, professors, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, more than just commoditized vendors. The better job you do at that, with being able to earn your way in early and often with the right people, the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, the more successful you'll be with reaching these targeted decision makers with better message penetration. Again, from a tactical perspective, I've mentioned repeatedly the value of, like, in small, highly targeted in-person events like lunch and learns and breakfast seminars and webinar series. Again, series is super important. This isn't one and done. They're going to go through a lot of touch points between stranger and purchase decision. We want to make sure that we're with them all throughout the way. Another very important tactical part of this is being micro-focused on getting to the right people and the right accounts. And for that, platforms like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Campaign Manager, the ads platform, can be super powerful. Outbound email can be super powerful, super precise. A lot of people think it's super nice to, like, position themselves as thought leaders and experts and earn organic reach on, like, LinkedIn in the feed or YouTube in the feed. And it's nice, but the challenge is, unless you're selling to a very broad segment of the marketplace, you're likely to have a really high loss factor. What do I mean by loss factor? Like, you could go viral for you, like get a massive amount, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of impressions or more on a LinkedIn post. But what good are those impressions if 98% of the people that you've reached are either from a company that's way too big or way too small, or the wrong industry or the wrong geographic location? And the more you're depending strictly on just algorithm, the more likely it is that, like, yeah, you have fantastic content. But let's say, for example, you're a data center decommissioning company that works in the mid-Atlantic, northeastern area of the United States. So occasionally you might flex and be able to do some really large, unusual jobs throughout the United States. But is it really helpful to get inbound leads from Singapore or from London or from Rio de Janeiro or whatever? It's like, yeah, it's a nice ego stroke to know that people are hitting the like button and commenting and you're getting people reaching out. But are you really in a position to do data center decommissioning deals on the other side of the planet when it's even a little bit of a stretch for you to do those on the other side of the United States? So there's a loss factor geographically. There may be minimum sizes as well. Maybe you've come to the conclusion that it's not cost effective to do a decommissioning deal on a small business, on a company that has, say, less than 100 employees or less than 500 employees or something like that. And there may be certain industries as well, by the nature of what you do, where you're either included or excluded based on a match between credentialing and certifications that you have versus the nature of their particular business model. Heck, like a bank or a hospital is going to be a lot more careful about how they dispose of data than someone that owns a clothing store. or a dog grooming business or something like that. So get really, really clear on that ideal client profile. Get really clear on your service capabilities. And that's a huge part of targeting, is recognizing that the organic reach alone, whether it's organic search, organic social, organic YouTube, whatever it is, you'll need a massive amount of traffic to offset the fact that only a very small percentage is qualified. But the central idea of why account-based marketing got so popular over the last decade or so is that hyper precision of, here's 100 accounts, 500 accounts, 3,000 accounts, whatever it is, that we've handpicked that are a perfect fit to be a future client. And we're selling big enough deals that we can afford to really, really invest a lot of resources going after trying to generate and nurture leads and develop sales opportunities with this particular list of 100 or 500 or 3,000 companies or whatever it is in your particular situation. So that's the reaching, that's the targeting, and the better message penetration is all about value and relevance. The way we figure out the value and relevance is incredibly high levels of client centricity, what's going on in their world, and how we can position our client-facing go-to-market team members to be seen as essentially part of our ideal clients, our targeted buyer personas, professional development and learning development process. We should actually have educational experiences that are so good that they're starting to dial back on paid training that they either travel to or have purchased through learning management systems or courses in the past, because what they're getting from you is so incredibly valuable that they just don't need those anymore. And the cool part is, when you're providing so much value that you're monopolizing their available free time for learning and development and training development, they don't really have a lot of time to pay much attention to your competition anymore. So you're kind of taking away the oxygen supply from competitive options. Who knew that talking about starving the oxygen supply away from your competitive options would trigger a scratchy throat coughing? Anyway, so at the end of the day, that's what I would be focusing on for reaching targeted data center decision makers with much better message penetration, is really precise on your ideal client profile definition, on that target account list, on those buyer personas. Have a fantastic educational event strategy. The right people, the right places, the right time, early and often. Educate and build trust. That's what I would focus on for reaching the right data center decision makers with better message penetration. Okay, what is up next? What's our next topic for today? This is an interesting one. So the data center ecosystem is organized into data center operators, technology companies, facilities related companies. We kind of place construction, real estate, and investment in the same part of the ecosystem. And then there's outsourced sales and marketing. So this next question is more about a career development question, or how to get into this space, as opposed to any particular one segment. So if someone wants to know how they can transition into a data center business development role, how can they move into a new job, a new career as a business development rep, like a BDR, or kind of its first cousin, the sales development rep, the SDR. We actually get this question quite a bit, because right now, especially the data center industry is going through such a period of amazing growth that there's a lot of companies that are hiring pretty aggressively for sales related jobs like this. And the most common transition that we see into this kind of roles is by coming into this from an adjacent perspective. Like, for example, I interviewed someone on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast a little over a year ago who had worked in telecommunications, worked for telecommunications carriers for the first 10, 15 years of his career. And more recently, in the last year or two, he moved over into running sales for a co-location operator. So he had probably about a 3 to 6 month learning curve on the technology and on the business side, but a lot of the same kind of personas, a lot of the same ideal clients, a lot of the same diagnose before you prescribe, a lot of the business development and partnership strategy was fairly transferable. It's quite common as well, a lot of times, for us to see people moving from SaaS, software as a service, into various parts of data center technology like storage or other parts of software, analytics or monitoring. Quite common as well, a lot of times too, that we see people moving from engineering roles into various parts of the data center facilities ecosystem. We've seen a lot of people recently move into business development roles from having traditional technology related jobs as well, because why would someone who worked as a IT professional want to move into business development? Well, in a lot of cases, one is boredom. Second is financial opportunity. If you think about, like, at the risk of really, really oversimplifying this, let's say you have a mid-level IT role in the United States, and maybe you've gotten to the point that you're plateauing at a level where you're working with some kind of mature commoditized technologies, and your compensation package is approaching 100,000, but you sense that you really hit a plateau on how valuable your current company's technology is relative to the competitive marketplace, how valuable your skill set is relative to the competitive marketplace. But after like 15 years in this, you've developed a lot of contacts in the handful of different companies that you've worked at. You've gone to a lot of conferences. You have a really good sense of how the industry is laid out and what the different personas are looking for. Your skill set could be incredibly valuable to moving over into a business development or account executive kind of role with a company that sells to companies like yours, or even companies that are adjacent to companies like yours. And what we see is in a self-driven buyer's journey now, where so many traditional salespeople are now competing for attention with the self-service experiences that people get, like by having deep relationships with their Chat GPT or their Copilot or Gemini or Claude or Perplexity. How do you earn your way in early and often in that kind of environment? And what we see increasingly is a lot of companies hiring subject matter experts that are a lot like peers of their target persona. So let's say, for example, you're a co-location operator and your primary buyer persona is mid-market IT directors within a 30 to 60-minute drive of where you're located. Your secondary persona might be channel partners, small managed service providers, or evaluated resellers or integrators in a similar kind of geographic radius. And in terms of like hiring someone that prospects and sells to that particular segment, massive, massive superpowers if you're able to hire someone away from one of your target accounts. Obviously not poaching away, but like someone that was looking for a new opportunity to move into something a little different, that would be seen as a peer of the personas they're selling to. Along the same lines, if you're hiring your first channel partner manager, and the ideal scenario is to get someone who worked as channel partner manager in a very similar business to yours, in a very similar size. The size is super important as well. It's very, very different to be one of a couple hundred people that works in a channel partner organization versus being the very first person that's hired to get a brand new channel partner program off the ground. So size and business model matters a lot. But absent that, the next best thing is someone that worked in a soft skills or client-facing role at the kind of channel partner that you'd want to recruit to come be part of your channel partner program. So we see a lot of this going on throughout IT professionals and engineering professionals and construction professionals, is people hiring people away from the client side to be able to have superpowers, as being seen more as trusted advisors and consultants and subject matter experts, as opposed to traditional vendor salespeople who essentially are just reading slides or reading the website. So they're seen more as consultants and seen more as peers. And I think that's a lot of transitioning into a data center business development role in a world where people have instant answers with ridiculous amounts of depth and volume because of these generative AI tools. It's more important than ever that the client-facing team members on your go-to-market team be technical enough that they're seen as peers by their prospects and clients. Like if you're calling, for example, on chief technology officers, you don't necessarily, to have that relevance, in a perfect world, if you worked as a CTO or an IT director or something like that at the most senior level of a similar size company, of course, You're going to have words are going to be super next level, but it's usually more than sufficient if you would have worked as a report or a second or third level report somewhere in an organization like that, so you understand exactly how that functioned. In other words, like, you don't have to have gotten senior enough in an enterprise company where you reported directly to the CTO. But if your boss's boss reported to the CTO, and from time to time there were town hall meetings quarterly or annually, and you frequently saw the emails and the playbook and the progression plan, and some people that you work with advanced to levels where they were either closer to direct reports or second level reports from that, you understand what it was like in that particular organization. And if you've worked in a number of companies like that, you also understand kind of the lay of the land, and you have a lot of street cred with understanding and empathy and client centricity. Again, this is the future, and in a lot of ways the present, of what sales looks like to be able to thrive in a world where so many of your prospects and clients have become really self-allergic to sales. They just don't want to spend a lot of time with sales teams anymore, but they will spend time with their peers. If they weren't willing to spend time with their peers, you wouldn't see the data center conference ecosystem growing like gangbusters, and they still need to learn. The reason why companies keep investing aggressively in reskilling and upskilling and retraining and workforce development and learning development and professional development. So to the extent that you can capitalize on both of those issues, the desire to spend time with peers and the desire to learn, you are fantastically well positioned to move into transition into a data center business development role, where you're the one who is the coordinator, the concierge, the tour guide that brings together all of these very valuable thought leadership, content, educational resources that you curate and moderate and bring together for your most important buyer persona. So, needless to say, with transitioning into a data center business development role, you're brand new to the data center industry. It's going to be quite some time before you'd likely feel comfortable getting up in front of a classroom or conference room and giving a 30 or 45-minute talk to your personas on something that's technical that you've never worked on before in earlier stages of your career. But if you have worked on something in earlier stages of your career that's hyper relevant to something they care about, and that's at least somewhat relevant to your company's commercial interests, yeah, you're likely one of the speakers. But it doesn't stop there. It really requires a deep understanding of those big goals and challenges, using those 5 or 10 big goals and challenges to map into 5, 10, 12 big topics for your monthly series, your monthly educational series. And to the extent that you can cover some of them individually and build the slides and give the talk, that's great. To the extent that you need to pull in coworkers, colleagues, solutions engineers, product managers, your CTO, your director of engineering, whatever it is that's hyper relevant to cover the gaps on some of these topics, this is super important. If your company is getting to the point where they're frustrated that a lot of your prospects and clients don't take your company seriously, and there's condescension and ghosting and jerking around and bickering on price and terms and everything, it's largely the same usually root cause is they don't see you as trusted advisors and experts. Your brand is no longer just about aesthetics. Your brand isn't just about the logos and the hexadecimal colors and the fonts and everything. Your brand is what the marketplace says about you when you're not in the room. And given that you're locked out of the room for the first 83% of the buying journey now, it's incredibly important to figure out a way to get back into the room. The way to get back into the room is to get out of that vendor box, stay out of that vendor box, and instead be seen as the teacher, the consultant, the trusted advisor, the subject matter expert, perhaps even the thought leader. And depending on what you did before you're transitioning in your career, before you're transitioning into this data center business development role, you may be part of that, part of the thought leadership team that presents this great content, or you just may be someone that identifies that there's these 10 or 12 topics that we want to cover really, really well. And you start asking around your coworkers and your boss and everything, who in the company knows this topic really well. And as long as there's good leadership buy-in, which in a small company likely means your CEO buys into the value of this, it shouldn't be a huge ask to get someone to plan on dropping in for 30 or 45 minutes once or twice a year to give a talk on something that's super top of mind for them. It's likely they may already have a deck for a similar talk that they've given at an industry association or in some kind of customer education context, or if at the absolute minimum, as you being the coordinator with all of this, the point person on these educational events, you go to them and say, okay, this is the topic. We dug a little more with some representative clients. These are the 5 or 6 big questions they want to know about. Can we set up time for coffee or lunch to brainstorm about this? So you go and you take a Google Doc and record it or whatever, however best you work, and you coordinate this. And whether it's you building the slides or you bringing along a colleague from marketing to help support by building the slides, you take the subject matter expert and you build the slides, and you get together with them a couple of weeks before and say, hey, based on what we talked about last time, I sent you the slides a couple of weeks ago. Did you have a chance to look at them? What do you think? And you're like, yeah, it looks pretty good. I would change this one and this one and that one, but other than that, we're good to go. So, it's a different go-to-market than what you really needed to do to be competitive 10 years ago. But for sure, this is the competitive battleground. And it's a huge part of being successful transitioning into a data center or business development role. I think for a lot of companies going forward, they're going to be even retitling people across sales and marketing teams to have titles in email signatures and titles on their LinkedIn profile and titles on their business cards that are more value focused. So in other words, like, let's say, for example, your company is in the liquid cooling business. Are you a thermal advisor or are you a business development rep? Who do they want to spend more time with? A thermal advisor, a liquid cooling consultants? Or do they want to spend time with a salesperson? And just being realistic here on their perception. Again, you're selling in many cases to highly technical IT professionals and engineers and developers and operations folks. And the better job you do with leaning into what's top of mind for them, the easier a path that you're going to have to be able to build the know, like, and trust, to educate and build trust. So that's what I'd be thinking about for transitioning into a business development role. If you're coming in as less technical, be prepared to level up and upskill. This started coming up in spades with people in sales and sales leadership roles with co-location operators about a year or two ago, where they're setting up like home computer labs that look like mini data centers in their home office to be able to tinker with and learn on and experiment with on nights and weekends. They're investing in entry-level and mid-level certification credentials. So they're making good use of their commuting time, their time sitting in airports and on planes, their time at the gym where they can put stuff in their ears and listen and absorb this. They're making really good use of that to level up on their technical skills and credentialing, because at the end of the day, being seen as a peer of your target prospects, your target future clients, is so incredibly impactful. I don't even really believe that this is a nice to have anymore. I think this is a really important part of the competitive playbook. And you're at a really severe disadvantage if you're continuing to sell and continuing to do business development the same way you did 10 years ago and aren't really tuned into the reality of how much these buyer preferences and expectations have changed. We need you to be able to provide more value than your prospects and clients can get from a conversation with ChatGPT. Are you prepared, or is there some serious work to do? Ultimately, the choice is yours. Some people choose employers that are really bought into this and are very supportive of this. Other employers are not. So ultimately, if you're in a career, if you're in a position where a significant amount of your annual compensation comes from your success, I certainly would want to put myself in a situation where my employer is adopting modern best practices and supporting my desire to adopt modern best practices that helps me be able to prospect and sell as competitively as possible. So when it comes to all of this, choose accordingly. But yeah, big picture, that's what I'd be thinking about for how to transition into a data center business development role. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, be sure to hit the like button. And if you're listening on a platform that allows you to leave a review, to leave a rating, we'd be thrilled if you would do that as well. So we're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor, and we'll come back and address 3 more of the biggest go-to-market sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the global data center industry.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week we dive into a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the global data center ecosystem. Speaking of which, if you or your team or your company is facing a really gnarly challenge that's driving you nuts that you think would be a great topic to address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're joining us from, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So what topic is up next? Next, we're going to dive into events. And we've talked a little bit about event strategy throughout today's program, but this particular one is connecting the dots between full funnel events and lead generation. How do we create a full funnel data center events program for lead generation? That is a fantastic question. And it's one that I think not enough people ask. When it comes to whether it's webinars that are held virtually or online, or what I tongue-in-cheek call offline webinars, which is basically the same webinar content and same webinar strategy, but it's held in a classroom or a conference room instead of on a screen. When it comes to a full funnel events program for lead generation, I think a lot of people don't think necessarily full funnel. They think of just brand awareness, and they think of trying to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. And when it comes to some of these really expensive, high-profile national and global conferences, I think they're being egged on by a leveling up fear of missing out, like FOMO kind of thing, with competitors who are increasingly throwing a larger and larger and larger tub of spaghetti against the wall, to the point where it's like a cement mixer size tub of spaghetti against the wall, except your competitor that's way bigger than yours is driving next year is going to drive in 10 cement mixers of spaghetti to throw 10 trucks full of spaghetti against the wall to see what actually sticks. So when it comes to evaluating like your event strategy as a whole, what I like to talk about first is doing your basic due diligence on individual events. And to do that diligence on individual events, we want to get their prospectus, the media kit, whether it's a gated part of their website or a PDF or whatever. We put that on the left-hand side of your screen. We need to see demographics at the company level, at the individual level. The more detailed, the better. Then on the right-hand side of your screen, bring up your ideal client profile, that one-page crisp definition of where they're located, their company size, their industry, and then also bring up your 2 or 3 most important buyer personas. And I just kind of want you to eyeball and look back and forth between, okay, these are our ideal clients. These are the most important people that we need to be educating and building trust with. How good is the match rate between who we care about talking to and who's actually going to be at this conference? Now, bear in mind, most conference organizers are not getting like CPA audited media kits. This is just a good faith reporting of who was there last year and who they think is going to be there this year. But if that good faith reporting is way off the reservation, it has a really low match rate relative to your ideal client profile, relative to your target buyer personas, I would certainly think long and hard about whether that particular event is the best use of your event budget of your event strategy. Like, let's look at 2 really simple examples. In one particular case, you perceive that when you look at their demographics against your ideal clients at the company level and individual stakeholders at the people level, you perceive that this particular conference is probably at least an 80% match rate. That's great. I would go forth and continue to participate in that conference. I'd like to ideally recommend that you participate in a way that you can educate and build trust, which means you need to figure out a way to earn your way in as a speaker who either keynotes or leads a breakout session or is on a panel in some way that you're being able to educate and build trust from the stage. That usually represents like the top 3% of attendees. Like, there's 2,500 attendees that are there, 75 speakers. So 75 out of 2,500 is 3%. In addition to those 75 speakers, the speakers are bringing along a mini entourage, usually on average of 2 people from their company. So that's another roughly 150 people, 150 ride-alongs with the speakers and 75 speakers. So 225 out of 2,500 attendees, roughly 10%. So roughly 10% of the conference is in a position to either being the one that's educating and building trust or being able to capitalize on a boss or a coworker that's educating and building trust. Another 10 to 20% of the people that are at the conference, another roughly 250 people, maybe as many as 500 people are there because of their booths. Their company is exhibiting or they're sponsoring. There's some kind of commercial interest in them being at the conference, which means that they're looking to capitalize on the goodwill and the traffic and basically the fumes that are created by the speaker at these particular events. So they set up their booth, spending anywhere from modest amounts to obscene amounts and usually everywhere in between to have an amazing presence for those 8, 12, 14 hours or whatever it is that the expo floor is open. And if the conference organizers do a good enough job of making it nearly impossible to be at the conference without being on the expo floor, if there's great food and there's a great open bar and some entertainment and stuff, then hopefully you'll get your small slice of the pie among the other 100 exhibitors that are there. So in the 120 minutes that person spends on the floor, when you divide those 120 minutes by 100 booths evenly, hopefully you get your 80 seconds of FaceTime with the right person in the right kind of context. But yeah, I mean, it's challenging to be able to educate and build trust in this kind of environment when it's so overcrowded. And the other 80% of the people at the conference, those are probably a huge percentage of your coworkers just fall in that camp where they're either neither speaking nor exhibiting. They're just there to attend. And usually the reason they're there to attend is to network with peers, learn, and see what's new. And in theory, you could do a lot of networking with peers. A significant percentage of the people are typically going to that conference to network for their future job, like job searching on their employer's expense account. We can debate the ethics of that all day long. In terms of learning, yeah, there could be some great sessions for you to learn. You could also learn from watching a lot of podcasts and attending webinars and doing a lot of self-study without necessarily 3,000 to 5,000 or your local currency equivalent, and essentially what usually works out to 2 to 3 weeks out of the office. What do I mean by 2 to 3 weeks out of the office? Well, 3-day event, depending on how far away it is from where you're located, could be as much as 8 hours of travel or more, 12 hours of travel or more. So that 3-day event really becomes a 5-day event. You're pretty much out of commission for an entire week. A couple days before you're going to be out of the office, you're scrambling around, running around, trying to get everything caught up so you can afford to be out of the office for the next week. And then when you come back, it's the same thing. You're scrambling around, trying to put out fires from all the things that were neglected for the 5 days that you're at the conference. So, and that's assuming you're not speaking or exhibiting. If you're speaking or exhibiting, typically you need way more than a day or 2 or 3 to get ready, and a day 2 or 3 ready to debrief and follow up and everything when you come back. So these are pretty big time and financial commitments. That's why it's so important to get the investments right into conferences that are attracting an audience that lines up pretty well with yours. What I see across the board on a global basis is that companies have completely forgotten about their ability to host some of their own highly targeted events, and instead are putting 90% plus of their events budget into renting attention at someone else's events. And the renting attention at someone else's events, again, can work out really well if there's a great ICP match. But if there's a bad ICP match, like only 10 or 20% of the people at that event line up with your ideal client profile or your targeted personas, you may be better off standing in front of a shredding machine with big piles of currency. It'll maybe less frustrating, certainly less time out of the office for doing it. And I don't actually advise doing either. Going to conferences that aren't a good use of your time or budget, that don't match up well with your goals, can be pretty frustrating. And rest assured that if your CFO caught you destroying currency in front of a shredding machine, I don't know whether they're calling security or tackling you or referring you for psychiatric help or all of the above. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of either. But there are some great conferences for you. It may be that there's like 20% that are totally big green lights. There may be another 20 or 40% of what you're currently doing that are good, but proceed with caution, like an orange light. And there may be a good 20% that are big red lights that you should just fire, for lack of a better word, and move on and reallocate those resources either to conferences that are better fit, or what I'm actually a bigger believer in is hosting your own events. Because when you host your own events, you get to decide exactly who gets invited. You get to decide exactly the topics that are covered, and your budget, both time and financial and everything, is so much less. You can do a lot more of those and a lot more lottery tickets or whatever you want to call it, a lot more at bats if you're into professional baseball kind of analogies, a lot more opportunities to get in front of the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they see you and your client-facing team members as teachers and consultants and subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders. And it's very difficult to cut through the noise and be seen as a trusted advisor and a thought leader at a massive global conference. Again, we talked about how 3% are speakers, another 2% are co-workers of speakers. So it's like 10% of the people that are really in a position to be educating and building trust at that event. That means 90% are not. When you host your own events, the context is set from the outset to be all about educating and building trust. You don't have to worry about a loss factor. You get to decide who gets invited. It's your ideal client profile. It's your target account list. It's the right people in the right accounts. The only time that I sometimes see people get a little bit off base with their expectations when they're just getting into hosting their own events for the first time, whether they're breakfast seminars or lunch and learns or something like that. And sometimes they get a little greedy and unrealistic. They're like, well, I wanted the CTO of this company to attend. They're like, sure, everyone wants the CTO of your target account company to attend. But if we can get 3 or 4 people that work for the CTO to attend, isn't that pretty good as well? Yeah, you got a point. And if we can win over those 3 or 4 people, you think we'll get to the CTO? Like, so again, this is the very basis of getting really crisp on that target accounts and account-based marketing and educating and building trust and being able to influence the full decision committees. So when it comes to creating that full funnel data center events program for lead generation, that's the events program. If you can host the events in person because you have a classroom or a conference room, great. That's always going to be better. The cool part with that, from your leadership perspective, from your finance perspective, is like you already have access to the room or the classroom, so you're probably not paying to rent that by the hour. You don't need to buy $8 cups of coffee or your local currency equivalent, and it's not going to cost you a small fortune in catering to bring in some light breakfast or some light lunch as part of this program. I would encourage you to find a middle ground. You know, it's representative of your company's brand, but doesn't go crazy on value. Like, for example, in the United States, if you're holding this kind of event and you have a classroom or conference room that hosts 20 people, something like getting trays of pastries and fresh fruit and coffee and juice from like Panera Bread or Dunkin' Donuts or Costco or something like that, a few $100s can put out a really, really nice spread for lunch, pizza, salads, deli. You don't need to go nuts. Again, like, the cool part with this is because your time cost and your financial cost is exponentially lower than pretty much anything you're going to do with national and global conferences. Your break-even point, our return on investment, like, it's like night and day. So when I talk about the idea of this being a series, that the first Tuesday of the month, the third Thursday of the month, whatever works for you, the time slot, whatever works for the day of the week, it's pretty easy to fund this on an annual basis. This is for most account executives, most business development reps. This is expense account stuff. This isn't something that's going to need a Herculean effort to move mountains to be able to do. This is more cultural buy-in of getting the right people in your company to come and give the talks and be a speaker. So you're providing high perceived educational value, as opposed to it not being seen as an infomercial by your prospects and clients. So that's the event strategy. That's the lead generation when they register, to really juice up the link to lead registration even more. I'm always a huge fan, once someone registers, to have the simple email marketing automation that you've been able to do 20 years that just replies back and says, "Hey, Joshua. Hey, Susan. Hey, John. It's so great to see that you registered for our upcoming breakfast seminar on cybersecurity best practices for mid-market manufacturing firms. But when it comes to this topic, it truly takes a village. It's a team effort. There's usually people involved from operations, support, cybersecurity, compliance, finance. So with that in mind, who else from your team, from your company would benefit from attending?" Simply hit the forward button, add a thought or two on why this matters. And we know the teams that learn together grow together. That's simple. Hey, who else should attend email works wonders to get multiple people from the same company registering. So you're generating more leads. You're proactively building consensus. You're finding out who else is on that decision committee, who else cares about what. When every registrant is asked, like, "Hey, what's your biggest question or challenge about your topic," or whatever, you're focusing on for that. So that does wonders with accelerating sales. Of course, when they register, the confirmation email can also say like, hey, you'll have plenty of chance to get your questions answered or meet with an expert from our team. But if you want to meet with someone before that, here you can book time on our calendar, and you can reinforce that on your confirmation page and on your confirmation email. So not only are you doing lead generation, you're actually doing sales cycle acceleration. Let's talk about the full funnel part of this as well. As I alluded to a few moments ago, because this is so much easier, so much less expensive to do relative to national and global events, you can segment and have a different series for each of your prioritized buyer personas. I would also, in addition to segmenting by buyer personas, I would also segment by life cycle stage or stage within the journey. In other words, I'd have customer only events, I'd have channel partner events, I'd have events for future clients that are prospects. That's what most people would typically do in this kind of context, where they're inviting potential clients. But there's a lot to be said too for a little bit of cross-pollination, having some of your happiest clients attend with your prospects. So kind of they're chatting up how great you are, kind of like informal social proof, or if you're hosting a panel, that for sure will come up as well. But what about the full funnel part of that? Where a lot of people miss the full funnel opportunity is the traditional webinar. The traditional event is usually about thought leadership, but that's not the only thing to think about. In a self-driven journey, a lot of the reason why people don't want to talk to sales early on is they want to stay in control. They don't want to be put through your shtick. They don't want to jump through hoops. They don't want to be qualified, put through the ringer. But there's a lot of people that want to learn more about your product or service that would be very interested in hearing a group session where they're not put through the ringer, where they're not qualified. And in the SaaS ecosystem, software as a service, this has been really popular for at least a decade now, and it's known a lot of times as a group demo. What a group demo is after someone has attended one of your best practices webinars, you'll give people the opportunity, usually as a call to action in the webinar, to click a button, essentially raise your hand if you want to schedule a one-on-one demo. But there's a lot of people that would like to see the demo that don't want to be put on the spot. So what you do the following week, and potentially the week after that, and the odd weeks when you're not doing the bigger event, is you invite them to a group demo. It's basically the same kind of content that you would cover one-on-one, except it's a handful of people, a couple handfuls of people, a couple dozen people. And instead of you calling on them individually and putting them on the spot, they're just coming to learn what it is that you do because they're curious. They've seen the thought leadership. They're really impressed with your team, and they want to know how specifically your company could help them. So usually in a simple 30-minute group demo, it's usually 5, 6, 7 minutes on some basic background trends. Usually you're sharing some industry data that validates something at the intersection of market research and some big goals and challenges that this particular buyer persona has. The middle, the sweet spot of that group demo, usually 6, 8, 12 minutes at the most, is the actual demo itself. And then you leave time at the end, the last 10 minutes, for some Q&A. That alone drives usually a lot of sales cycle acceleration. It drives a lot of alignment where someone that's a junior stakeholder or senior stakeholder invites their peers to learn along with it. The analogy that I use is, think about someone has a booth at a conference, and as part of the booth at the conference, they give a demo of their product or service every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. And they have a sign up that says rolling demos on the quarter hour, at the top and the bottom of the hour, whatever it is. There's a little sign to come back, and there's someone standing around a screen. It could be the CTO, it could be a product manager, whatever it is. And they have a wireless headset on, and there's a small group of people that are gathered around, either standing or sitting in some rows of chairs, seeing this live demo and asking some questions. And that alone, a lot of times, generates a lot of interest. Now, if you've ever been to conferences, you'll likely observe that even when that booth isn't overwhelmingly crowded, there's people that are standing in really close proximity to the person running the demo. They're standing or sitting or what have you. And then there's usually some additional people that are standing at the extreme edge of that booth, perhaps even not on the carpet of that booth, and more in the aisleway between that booth and other booths. Why are they standing back that far when the booth isn't that crowded? It's a great question. They're standing back that far when the booth isn't crowded because they don't want to be called on. They don't want to be put on the spot. So it's very similar to, if you think back to someone in high school or college that goes into a big lecture hall that sits in the back row. Why are they sitting in the back row? Because they don't want to get called on. That's all the more reason why that annoys a lot of professors many times, and they want everyone to move up to participate. But they're standing just outside of your booth on the edge of the carpet in the aisle because they don't want to be put on the spot. They don't want to have their badge scanned. But they're interested enough that you can see they're on their phone and they're slacking their boss or their coworker who's a couple hundred yards away. Hey, you got to get over to booth 17 and see this. This is exactly what we've been talking about. This is the person who attends the group demo. They're super interested in learning more. They're super interested in sharing it with their coworkers, but do not prospect them aggressively. Don't scan their badge. Don't put them through a traditional sales process. But many times they will self-accelerate. It's all about control. And the more technical they are, the more skeptical they are, the more cynical they are, the more highly educated, the more sales allergic they are, the more having this full funnel program becomes really, really important. So if you think about your traditional thought leadership webinars, your traditional panel webinars, those are like early and mid-cycle. Those are like awareness and consideration. Group demos are more decision stage. And again, they started in the SaaS world and it's very conducive to where you can give a screen-based demo. But if you're demonstrating generators or liquid cooling or something else that's very physical, you can give a demo with that as well. It's just a matter of like, what do you actually want to show people? What do you actually want to tell people? What do you want to get some physical clarity around that's significantly more than what you could demonstrate with what can actually go on a slide? So that adds some full funnel elements to that as well. I would also encourage you to have events both live and on demand for onboarding, for post-purchase, like customer education, customer marketing, enablements, all of that makes an enormous difference in the post-sales part of the journey. So if you just did that, if you had like a minimum of 3 different kinds of events, if you think for lead generation, your early, middle stage kind of thought leadership, customer panel events, like kind of like a live podcast interview in some cases. If you have like kind of that group demo for people that want to learn more but don't want to be put through the sales ringer, that's kind of your decision stage, late buyer's journey stage part for a lead generation, and then post-purchase. What can you do in a one-to-many fashion to help them get their initial value, intended value, extended value, so they onboard successfully, become huge fans of your platform, and great promoters that help you to generate more leads from their friends and colleagues. So that's what I'd be thinking about for best practices and strategy that goes into creating a full funnel data center events program for lead generation. Okay, what is up next? If you're enjoying this week's show, Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, you want to help spread the love, show some appreciation, be sure to hit the like button wherever you're watching. And if you're on a platform that allows you to review and rate us, we'd be delighted with that feedback as well. So what's up next? How do we improve data center sales productivity by leveraging automation? I love that one. How do we improve data center sales productivity by leveraging automation? So in many ways, this is a issue that needs to be tackled at the most senior level of your organization. And the smaller your organization, the more this goes all the way up to the C-levels in terms of strategy and resource allocation. And even in enterprises, will likely go all the way up to like a division director, or VP of data centers, or something like that in your particular company, or director of your subsidiary or regional subsidiary, whatever it is, like the CEO or CXO level type of role. The reason that this is so critical is improving sales productivity, leveraging automation, is at the intersection of product roadmap and sales and marketing and account management. And in order for us to figure out where your sales talents are best utilized, we truly need to understand what these buyer preferences are. And if your preferences are similar to the broader marketplace, you're likely going to find that most of your prospects and clients don't want to spend a lot of time with sales anymore until they're almost ready to buy. So what that means is all the basic education is happening without your salespeople running the education like they used to. I mean, as recently as 10 years ago, your account executives, your business development reps were in there for roughly half of a typical sales cycle. Now they're lucky if they're in for the final 10 or 15%. So that changes the nature of their role in that there's fewer conversations, but the conversations that they're going to have are way more technical and there's a lot more at stake. So this changes the nature of who you hire. This changes the nature of how you upskill and reskill. And when I talk about the hiring and upskilling and reskilling, this is the reason why your individual account executives and business development reps and sales directors are not going to be able to solve this alone, because these, in many cases, are big culture issues, big alignment issues that are getting decided at the executive level of the company. Are there feature sets that are going to make it easier or more difficult for your traditional sales playbook to be relevant going forward? Again, these are product roadmap, engineering, solutions engineering kinds of conversations. Are there issues that are coming up in account management that new features are going to make less relevant or more relevant going forward? And then how does marketing and lead generation and nurturing and positioning, how does all of this support and all of this fit into this world? So in terms of like leveraging basic automations and sales productivities, I would hope at this stage of the game that your company's CRM tools cover the basics, like automatically enriching company records, automatically logging calls, automatically logging video meetings, automatically logging emails. If you still have your sales reps using archaic CRM systems that require a lot of manual labor and they're constantly complaining about your CRM, like, yeah, that's some pretty big, that's some pretty big internal friction to address. And again, at the risk of sharing some basic productivity improvements that most companies addressed 10 years ago, but some still haven't implemented, is the self-booked meetings. So if your BDRs and SDRs and AEs and account managers have this back and forth with prospects and clients with, hey, I'd like to set up a time with meet with you. Oh, are you available Tuesday from 3 to 11? No, not available at either of those times. And you suggest some other times. That back and forth wasted an enormous amount of time and gives a crappy customer experience. One of the biggest automations that most people have leaned into, and again, this isn't new, this is most sales teams that are using modern tools implemented this 10 years ago. If your team hasn't, rest assured you're torturing your prospects and clients with making them jump through hoops and creating friction that's making you look very uncompetitive and like a pain in the ass to do business with. So if you haven't done something like that, I would like implement it yesterday. There's some hardcore people though that feel that asking your prospects and clients to find a time is insulting to them and wasting a lot of time. So kind of if you feel like that, the happy medium with that is please find a time that works for your schedule, or if you need help finding something that works for your situation, suggest 3 or 4 times and I'll see if I can move things around to accommodate. That's kind of the happy medium with all this, but just to understand the default playbook, 80 or 90% of people in sales at this point have, and most of your technical prospects, they don't want 6 or 8 rounds back and forth. They know they want to spend time. They don't want to spend a half hour booking a 15-minute meeting. They want to pick a date and time, get it on your calendar, and get their answers sooner rather than later. In a perfect world, they really don't want the meeting at all. They want to self-serve. They want to get the answers. And they're kind of frustrated that they can't get the answers from your website, that they can't get the answers from a simple search or ChatGPT kind of conversation. But in terms of like leveraging automation, like, yeah, the internal tools for reducing internal friction. We just talked about a great example of reducing external friction. Another huge thing with automation is as you're building your lead generation conversion paths and you know the typical journey, the breadcrumbs that someone goes on and what they want to know at various stages, the better job you can do with using the real estate on your confirmation pages and on your confirmation emails to suggest the next logical step. Not only does it help improve sales productivity and automate, but it can result in quite dramatic amounts of sales cycle acceleration. This is how you take someone who is a complete stranger, who converted on your website and has consumed several minutes, maybe several dozen pages of contents and videos over the last hour or two. And they're so bought into what you're talking about and so aligned and so on the same page with how you explain best practices in your category. They're like, okay, yeah, sign me up. So if they don't have the ability to actually sign up then and there, in other words, taking out a credit card and being able to self-sign up and self-onboard, the next best thing is they want to self-book time on your calendar. So again, that's a form of automation as well, as understanding the journey well enough to understand what step 2, step 3, step 4 looks like, and keep feeding those to those one after one. Because imagine someone, it's like 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon on a holiday weekend, and no one's going to be around from your sales team to address any questions live for at least another 40 hours, 48 hours plus another 12 hours, another 60 hours. So to the extent that someone finally has time to do the research on your category and solve this problem, why would you want to make them wait 60 hours? You shouldn't, because if you do, there's a really good chance that a competitor of yours is listening to this best practice and says, you know what, that guy Joshua Feinberg, yeah, he's onto something. We really do need to be proactive. We need to give them all the resources. We need to give them the FAQs, the frequently asked questions. We need to give them the videos. We need to allow them to self-accelerate and self-propel. And if we can have a buy now, sign up button and make it super convenient, we get a big leg up on the competition. If we can't do that because it's too complicated, the next best thing is let's let them book time on our account executive's calendar for when we reopen right after the holiday on Tuesday morning. But that's still 55, 60 hours later. So we want to make sure that we have lots of options to be able to leverage automation and acceleration. Integrations between tools are another big issue that messes up a lot of sales teams and messes up a lot of companies. And this is an especially big issue if your company's been through a lot of mergers and acquisitions, M&As, in the last several months, the last few years. And it used to be that that was primarily something that I saw happening in large numbers among data center operators, especially co-location providers. But I see a lot of consolidation happening across all parts of the data center ecosystem. Power companies, cooling companies, telecommunications companies. There's a lot to be said for being competitive requires resources, a lot more resources than it used to be competitive. What we're talking about, building a brand, services, capabilities, CapEx, OpEx, financing, what have you, that are causing a lot of companies to, and as a result, as a byproduct of this consolidation, a lot of times it creates a mess among tech stack. And that mess among tech stack creates internal friction and external friction and a crappy prospect experience, crappy customer experience. So there's a lot of pressure usually immediately following these mergers for sales ops, marketing folks, IT folks to really get their together and figure out how to make all these systems talk together. So in the meantime, like from like a grassroots practical level, especially among smaller companies, like I've been standardized on the HubSpot platform since 2010, for a long time at this point. And I've been heavily biased when I look for third-party tools at looking for tools that natively integrate with HubSpot. No API required. Next best thing is, like, a lot of times the tool integrates with HubSpot, but you do it through a simple user interface that doesn't require development coding, like Zapier. It's cost effective, pretty straightforward to be able to set up. So that also can be great for automation as workarounds, where you have multiple systems to make sure that you don't accidentally send tone deaf messages to prospects that make them like where it was only intended for customers, or vice versa, or you're sending stuff to channel partners that was intended for end users or something like that. So if you have a lot of those oopses going on, and the cost of those oopses can be really expensive, both financially and in terms of brand damage, that's another form of automation that I would also be leaning into to provide air cover across not just your sales team, but your account managers and the full go-to-market team. So those are some core areas that I'd be thinking about for improving sales productivity with leveraging automation, to the extent that your sales team members as well can be sharing content, educational content on their LinkedIn feeds that help to educate and build trust with their prospects. I think that's a huge win. There's a lot of companies with some really messed up thinking in that category, where they only allow people to share pre-scripted, pre-approved content that's very sanitized. So it tends to be very self-serving tends to be about clap for us, we're wonderful, and doesn't really have a point of differentiation and doesn't really share personality. But to the extent that your sales professionals can either be sharing helpful tips and hints or sharing unique resources with, or sharing some industry resources with their own unique insights attached to it. Like, hey, I went to a conference and I attended this breakout session with this industry expert, and these are my top 3 takeaways. Or I read this new report that came out, and these are the 5 areas that I think are most relevant for IT executives and manufacturing companies, whatever it is. Like, it can be your own thought leadership. It can be you summarizing and adding your own takeaways and spin on other people's. But the key thing is you're sharing educational content that isn't just, hey, we won an award. We hired a new person, clap for us, we're wonderful. Yeah, your coworkers, your boss certainly want to clap for you with that. Maybe some of your channel partners might, but the reality is the much bigger part of your funnel, the prospects and the big part of the audience that you're trying to educate and build trust with, what's in it for them? Share tips, useful information, and best practices that they can say, wow, that guy Joshua, that lady Susie, she really knows her stuff. Like, I keep seeing these great tips. Maybe I should reach out to her and set up time to talk to her, because I think we're going to be getting ready to buy something similar to what their company offers in the coming weeks. So that's another kind of way to get leverage and automation, is when your sales team is aggressively growing their first degree connections in their target accounts and committed to sharing helpful content. It can be text-based content, it can be image content, it can be photos, it can be video clips, or all of the above. One, the challenge is making it show it provides value to the buyer personas and not just value to you. It can't be selfish. And second, the thing that stops most people from getting started before they ever start is, even if they want to start, a lot of times their employers, for their own selfish reasons or fear reasons or risk aversion or living in the past, dinosaur logic, whatever you want to call it, are literally blocking their employees from being able to have a differentiated point of view and being able to share helpful, useful information. And like, I don't know, what's the next step? That you follow your employees around at a conference with a cattle prod or a taser. And if they say something that's off message or off script at the bar or over coffee or something like that, you zap them. Like, it gets a little ridiculous at some point. But it's interesting with hosting the Data Center Go to Market podcast. I've had a lot of well-intentioned people that want to appear as guests on the podcast, and their employers don't necessarily differentiate between whether they're doing an interview on BBC or Bloomberg or CNBC or something like that, or coming on the Data Center Go to Market podcast. It's like, they don't care whether they're in front of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or a few hundred or a few dozen. Like, this censorship of employees like messes up not only your own individual brand, but your team brand and your company brand at a time when you really could be improving your sales productivity quite dramatically and leveraging this as another form of automation. But again, if you're in a position to be able to affect change in this, understand this is one of the most important competitive battlegrounds going forward in a self-driven buyer's journey. So if you're preventing your employees from being able to participate in LinkedIn in this fashion, you're really doing not only your company, you're not only doing these individuals a disservice, you're doing your company a disservice. Now, that's not to say that it can be the Wild West and they can go say whatever the heck they want. There can be guidelines, there can be some training and everything like that. But increasingly, I see that being a really important part of the playbook. It also helps to justify, like, when you just gave them $30,000 or your local currency equivalent for them to attend 8 or 10 conferences over the last year. This gives them a little bit of ability to document like what they learned, what some of the best practices are, and get more leverage out of that selfie by explaining the context of that and how their prospects and customers and clients that follow them they're connected with them on LinkedIn can get some learnings out of that. The way you'll know it's working is in LinkedIn. There's a little icon besides. There's like the like button. There's the green button to celebrate, and there's a little yellow light bulb for sharing insights. If they're getting a lot of people that are clicking the little yellow light bulb that they're sharing something that's insightful, I think that's a pretty good step in the right direction to help further this idea of improving sales productivity by leveraging automation. Video is a big one too. Much faster to build know, like, and trust and emotional resonance with being on camera, whether we're talking about a Zoom meeting, whether we're talking about a Loom video, like night and day with being able to build an emotional bond. And obviously in a perfect world, you want your prospect or your client to have their webcam on as well. But even if theirs is turned off, just yours being on, coming across as genuine and authentic, friendly, approachable can make a world of difference for being able to convey complex ideas and enthusiasm and sincerity. So those are some basic best practices that I'd be thinking about for improving data center sales productivity while leveraging automation. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to share that in the comments wherever you're watching, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming episode. So what is up next? What's our final question that we're going to be addressing this week? This is a great one, and I think it's hyper relevant for the world we live in now, where people just don't have a lot of tolerance for moderately relevant and irrelevant anymore. They only want things that are hyper relevant to who they are and what they care about. And that's part of the reason why people are literally falling in love with ChatGPT. If you've ever heard friends or family members joking that they have a friend or family member that's in a relationship with Copilot or ChatGPT, and they talk to them like they're a significant other, like, yeah, there's some deep emotional bonds that are going on there. And that's competition for you. One of the best ways to survive and thrive in that world is to get a lot more dialed into exactly who your ideal clients are and exactly what's going on in their world and how you can help them. And segmentation and personalization is a really big part of that. So the question is, how do we segment our data center leads based on life cycle stages and behaviors? How do we segment data center leads based on life cycle stages and behaviors? Now, the kind of person that's asking this is probably deep into being like a CRM administrator or customer relationship management administrator, or working in marketing operations or sales enablement or something like that. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for not only segmenting the leads based on who they are, but where they are in the research and decision-making process, and being able to immediately shine a spotlight on those that are taking certain behaviors that are showing signs of dramatic acceleration. High intent, as it's often called. So to segment based on life cycle stages, you first need to get on the same page internally about what your life cycle stages are and what's the difference between someone that's like a lead versus a marketing qualified lead versus a sales qualified lead versus a sales opportunity. This is a big issue because especially among small and mid-sized companies that I consult with, and I've hosted on the podcast and known over the years, there's a lot of disagreement internally about what a lead is. From a marketer's perspective that's trying to meet their key performance indicators and their objectives and key results and show that they're making some progress and moving the needle, a lead could be a badge scan that someone that visited your booth at a conference that you sponsored. It could be a subscriber to a newsletter list. It could be a registrant for a webinar. It could be someone that downloaded an ebook or a special report or something like that. It's a lead. It's a person at a company. In a perfect world, it's enriched so you know like what the company is, their size, their location, and this person's job title. Is this person ready to talk to sales? Are they ready for a sales conversation? In most cases, probably not, but it's leads. There's people too that scrape lists from the web and call those leads. Okay. Technically that's a lead as well. So how do you get on the same page about like what's a lead versus what a salesperson calls a lead? Now, an account executive, they want to spend all their time talking with people that are high fit, that fit their ideal client profile perfectly and are showing high signs of interest, that are almost ready to buy. And they want all the heavy lifting to be done with marketing and with their sales development reps, with their business development reps. So by the time they show up, it's already a qualified lead or on their way to being a qualified opportunity. So there's a lot of disagreements among different stakeholders. And the bigger your company is, the more likely it is that this is already fleshed out. The smaller your company is, the more there's likely a lot of ambiguity around this. So it's really important to get your leadership together and get on the same page about these different life cycle stages and what they really mean, what you're going to measure, and what you're going to focus and optimize around. Another point of confusion also a lot of times too is there's life cycle stages, there's buyer's journey stages, and there's deal stages. In my training course, the Go-to-Market Strategy Reboot Camp, I talk a lot about this. There's a couple slides, a couple short videos that deals with this very topic. Like in a buyer's journey, you think about the earliest stages where someone has a problem or a solution. They're like in the awareness stage. In the middle, they're starting to compare the different options that are in front of them, start to evaluate your category. They're like in the middle is like often called the consideration stage. They're in consideration of your broad category, but they haven't really dialed into specific companies yet. At the decision stage, they start looking at specific companies and specific products and services. So how does that line up? How do buyer's journey stages And the challenge with buyer's journey stages, by the way, is it used to be that salespeople could count on the fact that they'd have a significant role, at least in the consideration of the decision. Although a lot of times they were locked out of awareness. Today, awareness and consideration are pretty much all self-serve, and you're only getting a role in decision. But if you do things the right way and you educate and build trust, and you're part of learning and development and professional development for your prospects and clients, you can actually still have a pretty major role and a pretty important role in awareness and consideration. And the companies that do that are the ones that really get to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them when they ultimately decide who they're going to buy from. So that's journey stages. Life cycle stages are like lead, marketing qualified, sales qualified, opportunity, customer, evangelist. These are classic categories that have been around in CRM technology for well over a decade. And it's largely designed to make sure that the right person in your company is handling the communication with the right person at the right time, so you don't accidentally talk to a prospect like a customer or vice versa. So you don't accidentally treat an opportunity like an early stage lead, because when you do that, you could send them messaging that really contradicts what you're trying to accomplish, and it creates a lot of brand damage, really hurts your credibility. So that's journey stages and life cycle stages. And then within the opportunity life cycle stages, usually deal stages. And again, the nomenclature, the terminology I'm talking about is pretty industry standard, but it's 100% industry standard if your company uses HubSpot as your CRM, or likely even Salesforce is pretty similar. As you get off into some less popular CRM and marketing technologies, and maybe slightly different terminology, but big picture, it's the same issue, is that we're organizing around a self journey. We're organizing based around, and that's an external facing method. Like buyer's journey is an external facing way of looking at things. Life cycle stage is an internal way of looking at things, of like who on your team should be communicating with a specific person at a specific time. And when you do that the right way, you're also likely synchronizing the life cycle stage across all the different contacts that are part of that company. So when one person from a company advances to opportunity, the whole company is advancing to opportunity. So again, you don't shoot yourself in the foot, sabotage you, and cause brand damage by sending inappropriate messaging to the wrong person in the wrong context at the wrong time. Then within the opportunity life cycle stages, deal stages, and that's what your sales leaders and your pipeline and your deals forecast obsesses over trying to get right. And it's more art than science. There's definitely some science to it, but this is where you say that, okay, buyer takes a certain behavior, they're at 10% likelihood to close. Buyer takes this next behavior, they're at 30% likely to close. And this is where you're taking the probabilities, multiplying it times an average deal size and a forecast date. And this is what's helping you to calculate, in theory, what's sitting in the pipeline and closable at any given time. And notice I said when buyer takes step, buyer demonstrating an action. So in terms of segmenting based on life cycle stages and behaviors, so those are three different segmentation strategies. When it comes to behaviors, we're also really very focused on okay, they did something on your website that indicates that they're showing a much higher sign of interest than you thought they were, either currently or you thought they were a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago or a couple of days ago when a human from your team last looked at this lead. What would be a behavior that they might take that would indicate a high sign of interest? Well, the most explicit sign of behavior that would indicate a high sign of interest is filling out a form that says, I want to talk to a salesperson. Or the higher value-based version of that is, I'd like to schedule a free needs analysis, a free consultation, schedule a tour, something that can have some benefit bullet points around it, as opposed to the more, I don't want to say crass, but the more simplistic, schedule a time to talk to sales. What can we do to provide more value around it? So that's a much more obvious behavior where they know that you know. A less obvious version of behavior is, okay, we have a known contact and they're looking at your pricing page. And not only are they looking at your pricing page, they looked at your pricing page just now, and they've looked at your pricing page 10 times over the last 7 days. Wow. They're pretty interested in your pricing, which probably means they're also pretty interested in your product, which means they likely even have some questions or some concerns about your pricing and product. That's for sure something that should be segmented and sent immediately to the contact owner, the account executive who is assigned that contact, or rotated into assign that contact. And the way most companies would do that is they usually have depending on the value of the interest and the intent and the level of how close that is to your ideal client profile is typically multiple messages. An email will go, an SMS message will go, a Slack alert will go. Something will jolt them out of their chair with a big sign that pops up and says, pay attention to this lead. No, they won't do that last thing, but they will for sure do SMS messages and Slack messages and emails. There's usually, and a lot of times too, a task is created with your team lead so they can check and make sure that this high intention opportunity isn't being ignored with this sign of strong behavioral interest. So what else besides a talk to sales? What else besides a pricing page view, a contact view? They're curious about where you're located. Looking at some kind of social proof or testimonials or reviews. Again, that's for sure sending signs of interest. Looking at a specific product page, like you thought they were your primary buyer persona, but they're looking at your secondary personas page on your Who We Help page on your website, and they keep looking at that secondary persona page repeatedly. Does that mean that the segmentation that you have in your database is likely wrong, and they identify more with your secondary buyer persona than your primary buyer persona? So in terms of, that's how you could certainly segment based on a behavior. And what would you do at that point? You'd probably assign a task to the assigned contact person to review this person's contact timeline, look them up on LinkedIn, and figure out if they're in the right category, if they're being nurtured properly, if they're being worked properly by your sales team. What are some other behaviors that would indicate high interest besides like looking at a pricing page, looking at a Who We Help page, looking at a contact page? Opening emails. And the technology and the privacy environment with being able to track that is certainly very different today than it was 10 years ago. But if you sent someone a register for events, schedule a consultation, whatever, and you keep seeing that they're opening and opening and opening, it's possible that they're false positives. It's possible you don't see it at all because it's being blocked, but that can certainly be a behavioral signal. And then there's also a number of other related type of signals that can show up that are set up by your marketing or sales technology that can help you better segment your leads based on the stages and behaviors. Webinar attendance, event attendance, that almost always indicates that someone is definitely a little bit more interested in at least learning. The person that attends 100% or 80% of a webinar is certainly usually more interested than the person that only attends 3 minutes. Of course, if they go and a day or two later, they watch 100% of a recording, that sends a pretty positive signal. If you see them watching the recording repeatedly, that again sends a positive signal. Another interesting behavior that you can track in most CRMs as well as seeing additional contacts from the same company that are being added. That usually tells you if you haven't initiated that. In other words, if you're not running like account-based marketing type of ads using like LinkedIn Campaign Manager or doing outbound, more than likely the source of that growth of number of contacts in your company, in that particular company, if you're not adding them manually, is they're talking about you, which is great, usually. Hopefully they're saying good things about you, but that's usually a good thing to see that, we went from having 3 contacts in this company to having 13 contacts in this company over the last 7 days, 10 new contacts. Who are these people? What are they looking at? And how can the account executive who's working this account learn from these additional conversions and how they're interacting with our content? So there's a lot of cool things that you can see both by inferring and seeing things that are like inferential stuff is stuff that you can see based on behaviors. And then there's explicit things where they know they filled out a form and they're expecting to hear from someone like you. But all of those can be great strategies for segmenting and better personalizing the experience, and kind of the sky's the limit with what you can do. But if you're looking to reduce internal friction, if you're looking to provide a better prospect experience, provide a better customer experience, and be competitive with how others in your segment are likely running their marketing and sales, modern marketing and sales playbook, I'd think long and hard about what you can do to level up on better segmenting your leads based on both life cycle stages and behaviors. So again, that's how I would think about what you can do to drive big improvements for both internal and external purposes, for lead generation, for sales cycle acceleration purposes, for eventually net promoter score purposes, with more satisfied prospects, more satisfied clients. When it comes to segmenting your data center leads based on both life cycle stages and their buyer behaviors. So that's the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you got good value from this week's show, make sure to smash the like button on whatever platform you're watching. And if you have the opportunity to review and rate us, we would be thrilled and very grateful if you could do that as well. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming show, be sure to drop that in the comments. If you want to make sure that you get invited and notified about upcoming educational events and resources like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg, Feinberg, founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute and host of both the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show and the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to be, make sure to mention in the connection invite note that you've watched Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A and that you're a fan of the show. I'd be happy to be connected with you. And on the topic of podcast, if you or someone from your team would be a great guest for us to continue to consider interviewing on an upcoming episode of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, LinkedIn is also a great way to reach out as well. So we're so glad that you're able to join us for this week's show. We wish you and your team and your company great success in growing your impact in the data center, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure ecosystem. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you back again next time. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.